please excuse my environment here, building a house. So, we're in an apartment right now. So the filming situation's a little disheveled at the moment, but at any rate, I wanted to get this out. I think there's been a lot of comments made in the media, politicians, talking heads. It's everywhere. It's all over Facebook, Twitter. So I just want to get ahead of it a little bit and put out my thoughts on this. Kind of put some of these arguments to rest, bring up some things for people to think about. Hopefully, use a little bit of logic that people will be able to understand and relate to while they're formulating their opinions to push for more gun control, tighter legislation, stricter legislation, or just outright bans on particular items. Listen to a lot of radio during the day, watch a lot of analysis on current events that are occurring in the society, a lot of arguments on Facebook, discussions back and forth with people who are on both sides of these issues. So I've got a lot of experience in the gun community, and I spent a lot of time under the Obama administration, even going back to the Brady ban. And when the Brady ban was in full effect is when I got into gun ownership. I'm an Iraqi freedom veteran. I am a Desert Storm veteran. So I've seen what happens to an unarmed population, and I know I think ultimately a lot of the people that are talking about gun control, not everybody, and I don't even think it's the majority, but I think there's certain segments of the population that talk about gun control that would be 100% happy if we had absolutely zero guns in society. Now, that's great for the people who are probably asking for that, because they're probably making enough money where they can afford an armed guard, or they can have heightened police presence, or they've got security available to them at all times. And so for them to need to feel protected, they have the ability to pay for that. But for the average person who goes to work every day, comes home, kisses their wife and kids, and goes to bed at night, gets up and does the same thing, gets a couple of weeks off every year to go and have a family vacation, having something like the ability to defend their family is something that they understand and are willing to and expect to have to take on for themselves. It's not something that they want to have to delegate or relegate to someone else. Their safety is in their hands. They take it seriously, and they want to fight for the ability to be the protector in their household. So when you start talking about removing that ability, you have to question the motives of why people are asking for that, and that's the first thing I do. I'm a cynical person by nature. What is it that the person who's put themselves out there, what is it they're trying to do? Are they really trying to save people's lives, or are they just trying to do something that makes them feel better? And the only way they know how to feel better and make the country feel better as a whole is to pass a law or pass some kind of legislation that will ban something, so that they can feel like their day has been a success and they've done something to better society. But that isn't really a practical solution. It's not an educated solution. There's no facts to back that up, and I'm going to go over that throughout this video. But I just wanted to kind of preface this, by what are the motivations of the people who are putting out these videos. I question that. I think you should as well. So some of the things, I've got some of my education is based on emergency preparedness. I have a couple of degrees in that, and one of the questions that I immediately started to ask myself, especially with the times that we live in, the times. But, ISIS is something that has been around for a while. Al-Qaeda was around before that. You had domestic terrorists under the Clinton administration. You had the Davidians, and you had, there was the guys up in the mountains there. So there were, anarchists, people who wanted to attack society, wanted to bring down society and civilization as we knew it. And there've always been these kinds of people. So, taking large scale events, like in this particular case, a 22,000 seat or ticket venue, where you've got an open air area and you've got high positions surrounding that area, right? So you have all these buildings that are surrounding this open air venue. And I'll roll a picture in of when I stayed at Mandalay Bay in 2015. I was there for a conference, and I have a picture of the exact area where that whack job was set up and overlooking the area where the concert was. So, I mean, you can see the vantage point. So you got 22,000 people consolidated rather in a single area, and you've got all these high positions. Why not in some of these emergency action plans or some of these, emergency preparedness plans or these, safety of event preparedness scenarios where these police departments are constantly practicing? Why not take into consideration you've got these high points where a shooter could take up a position and rain down from above, right? We can't expect that the police department are going to be able to train for every scenario, but it seems like to me that this is a pretty basic one. You've got counter snipers set up in stadiums that don't have high points for football games. Why wasn't one of these police officers who's a trained marksman given a rifle, a designated rifle to get into a high position, or maybe two of them, so you could have, if God forbid there was multiple shooters, you'd have at least multiple marksmen who could take shots and put shots on the target before the police on the ground were able to determine where the individual was at. So I heard one of the press conferences tonight, and this is Tuesday night, the 3rd. So I heard one of the most recent press conferences tonight that it took the shooter 11 minutes to go through all of the rounds that he went through. Now, that's gonna feel like a million years if you're getting shot at, but that's not a very long time. So when emergency responders are looking at how long does it take for emergency response to get to the scene and start making an effective change on the actions that someone's taking, a minute or 2 or 5 or 10 doesn't seem like a very long time. And it's really not when you're coming in. If you're an officer on patrol and you're trying to get to the scene, if you're on the scene in 120 seconds or 180 seconds or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, those are great response times. But if you're on the receiving end of that criminal activity or that violent attack, that's going to seem like forever. And depending on how many rounds these guys have, it could be the end of somebody's life or several somebody's lives. Now, I'm a proponent of concealed carry. I'm a proponent of self-defense. I think the tenor and the bias in this video is going to definitely allude to that fact if it hasn't already. But it's not practical to carry a pistol into a venue like that and expect to be able to return fire. But the police have a more macro level view of a scenario or situations like this when these promoters are permitting for these events. So when the police enact their emergency plans, emergency action plans, or preparedness plans, they already know what to do and how to set up for these venues. Why not have a designated marksman or 2 as part of a group? So if you're going to have X number of people and you've got 4 buildings with a vantage point that looks down on a potential target, you're going to have intersecting fields of fire for these designated marksmen, so they can have a high point, so they can take action, they can put shots on target, maybe even suppress an active shooter from a high point like that. So the other piece of or the other detail in this press conference was the shooting stopped after I think it was 11 minutes, but it took police 72 minutes to breach the door. So I'm assuming maybe somebody put a shot on him from the ground. I don't know. I haven't seen the autopsy, but if you look at the picture, he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I'm not going to roll that in. I think it's a little too obscene. But it's definitely a self-inflicted gunshot wound, but there is some markings on his chest as though maybe somebody had took a shot on him. I don't know if it was a fatal shot. I don't know. It's all conjecture from a very bad photo. But regardless, he took his own life potentially after a few minutes, but it took him almost another hour to get into the room. SWAT had to get there, had to get on scene. SWAT had to set up a entry point and then make entry. They're not going to go and just barge into a room and like you see on the movies. They're going to analyze the environment and make sure there's not booby traps and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't begrudge them for that. My only question is why doesn't somebody in the Las Vegas Police Department, why didn't they take that in consideration, knowing that this venue has all these high points surrounding it? So I've beat that horse. So I'd be interested to hear, how they're going to resolve that moving forward. I've taken notes here, so you're going to see me looking down. How do you just stop? So this is a question that people have been asking. If you've got a determined assailant, somebody who wants to do damage or wants to create death, they're suicidal, they're homicidal, they're a psychopath, whatever their situation is. They've got depression, but they don't want to go out alone. They're mad at the world for whatever is going on in their lives, and they want to punish. How do you first identify that person if they're reclusive? If they're isolated, if they're detracted, they don't have a lot of people around them. How do you know that person is having a problem? Secondly, what law do you pass to prevent somebody who's got a mental health disorder like depression and anger? How do you pass a law against somebody who's got depression because one person's going to go out and potentially do something, when depression affects millions of people at different times throughout their lifetimes? Can you pass a law? Should you pass a law? That's an ideological question that I pose to society. Do you want to get into the business of diagnosing people and then removing their ability to interact in society? Whether it be, and don't just limit it to one right. Why not limit it to all rights? If you've got a mental health disorder that makes you not think just right, should you be allowed to vote? Are you really putting in, do you have the best interest of society by putting people with a mental health disorder and giving them the ability to vote? You're going to take away their right to own guns. Why not take away their right to vote too? They shouldn't be electing the politicians that are going to get us into potential wars with other countries. So, how far do you run down this rabbit hole? I don't think that that's something that you can legislate. It's so infrequent. These things happen, and people will argue, well, it seems like it's happening more and more. If you look at the textbooks, it's not happening more and more. It's happening the same amount that it's always happened throughout the history of humanity. You just have the internet on your pocket, you have a camera in your pocket, and you have the ability to present that information to the rest of the world instantaneously for everybody's consumption. So it's not happening any more than it's ever happened. It's, about it, you hear about it, you see it, and you're impacted more viscerally. Your emotions are tied to it a whole lot more than they ever have. So I understand the humanity in wanting to be able to prevent these kinds of things from happening, but logically, you take emotion out of it, logically it's not possible to do. When people talk about passing laws and trying to enact legislation that is going to do something, I think I alluded to that in the beginning of this. Do you really have the best interests of society in mind when you're looking to ban and implement versus because there's a lot that goes on around gun control and trying to do something when there's a mass shooting like this or a mass casualty. There's a Sandy Hook where all the children were killed. Tragic, devastating event that occurred Sunday nights. Another tragic, devastating event. The media makes a big deal out of body counts. CNN disgusts me with their constant looping of the machine gun fire and the dead bodies and the people running and screaming and the fear and all of that, that's just disgusting. It's a grotesque, obscene view of humanity that they can't get enough of. And they actively seek out these people who are distraught and devastated, and they put a camera in their face and they get their opinions on film. And can you blame these people for being emotional? Can you blame them for being upset? No, you can't. I mean, these people have just gone through a life-changing event, so they're going to have a harsher opinion. But if you really have society's best interest in mind, you don't just wait to go and do something when there's a mass tragedy or a mass casualty scenario like, Sandy Hook or Virginia Tech or Columbine or whatever. Insert tragedy here, right? I mean, there's many to choose from, right? But you look at the society in general, and you look at what is the exposure to this type of violent act. And you when you don't have a tragedy and you look at the numbers, you start seeing numbers that don't support that, and I'll cover that in a minute. Another thing I wanted to discuss is, it seems like people have these politicians and the talking heads and the liberals who don't understand guns, and they don't understand the desire to have a gun, and they don't feel that their self-protection, maybe they live that their self-protection is as important as another person's right to be able to live, right? I mean, that's an argument people say. But you have to look around at the kinds of environments these people live in. Do they live in New York City, where there's a high density of people, and there's 50,000 police officers in that city, and there's a police officer on every corner, and they can get to you within a minute? Do you have that same sort of self-defense and self-preservation ability if you're in a suburb, if you're in a bad side of town and you've got one police officer's got to cover 100 square miles? So you have a different need for protection based off of where you are. And if you're in a society like an LA or a New York City, where you have high densities of people in a very small area, Miami's another one, then you're going to have a higher density of police per square mile. So you're not going to need as much. I have a saying that I use every once in a while when I'm trying to be, a chucklehead. I carry a gun because I can't carry a cop. And what that means is, or what I mean by that statement is, if there was a police officer that could be with me, or an armed security guard, or a 500-pound jiu-jitsu wrestler with me that I could carry around at any time, then no, I wouldn't need a gun. I may not feel as threatened by the possibility of violence being taken upon me. But if it's just me, a 40-something-year-old guy who used to be stronger, I'm still strong. Anyway, if I'm a 40-something and 2 or 3 or 4, or somebody gets the drop on me, 20-somethings, am I going to be able to defend my family? Am I going to be able to defend my children? Am I going to be able to thwart an attack upon me? Or am I just going to be a victim? I think what a gun does, and what the ability for somebody who concealed carry does, is it offers them at least a fighting chance. It offers them an opportunity to protect themselves. Whereas if you don't have that opportunity, then you're just a victim. And the criminals, the wolves of the world, and their pack mentalities will take advantage of people who can't defend themselves in those scenarios. So, crime doesn't go away just because you get rid of guns. What guns do is they provide people who are not the strongest, or they're not the most capable, or that don't have the ability to take on multiple attackers, and it gives them the ability to defend themselves against that type of a threat. When you look at the kinds of threats that are out there, psychopaths and people who would kill, the type of item that they use to perpetrate these acts. Some may use a gun. those are the ones that catch the most news coverage. But you've got people that have used trucks, and there was I think it was in Nice, France, where a person took a truck, hijacked a truck, didn't even have the opportunity to buy it. He just hijacked it, and he killed 85 people. You've got hijackings of airplanes where they just crash airplanes, and you lose hundreds of people in one shot. You've got sabotage, things like tearing up a commuter train and causing death and damage and devastation to the rail lines. You've got people who use bombs. You got the guy in Oklahoma City where he used fertilizer, ammonium nitrate and diesel fuel, and he blew up an entire building, killing, I don't remember how many, hundreds. But so you've got a determined criminal. You've got a person who's got the ability to inflict major damage on somebody, and if they choose to use a gun, that is an item that they are using. That you can't legislate against the ability of somebody to commit murder. Murder is already a crime. Capital murder is already a capital offense. You're going to get life and death. And where I'm at, I'm in Texas. So if you commit more than one murder, or more than one crime in the commission of a crime, more than one felony where one of those felonies leads to a murder, that's a capital offense, and you could be sentenced to death for that. So you can create all the laws in the world, but you can't legislate somebody who's already a psychopath, who's already intent on murder, and doesn't care about their own life. They're going to do whatever it is that they need to do in order to fulfill their wishes of taking as many people out as they can. Gun is just a tool. You can legislate the shit out of it, but you're not going to stop murder. They're still going to happen. So I think that this is a misdirected effort that people are trying to push out there. And when you start trying to legislate a device, an inanimate object, it's like, some of these are cliche now, but it's, diabetes is a far bigger killer of humans, of Americans, than guns are in general, across the board, all spectrums. Diabetes kills more people every year than guns do. If we're going to start blaming the items and not hold the individuals responsible for what they put in their mouths, then let's ban spoons, because everybody knows you can eat better with a spoon than you can with a fork. So it's obviously the spoon's fault. That's the kind of nonsense that people in the gun community hear. Another cliche, banning guns or blaming guns for murderers is like blaming a pencil for spelling errors. They're just nonsense. You're blaming a gun. Okay, guns are what inflicted the death, but it was the person that was pulling that trigger. It was the person who plotted that murder. It was the person who intended on committing these major crimes, so that the CNNs of the world and the MSNBCs and the Foxes and the CNNs or MSNBCs and CNBCs and ABC, CBS, they'll go out there and they'll put cameras in people's faces, and they'll get people crying, and they'll get people who are sad and they've lost loved ones. And GoFundMe's get set up, and sheriffs stand in front of cameras talking about, how they're going to make their community safer, and politicians get in front of cameras and they talk about how we need to do something now, right? But you can't stop murder. These murderers will commit murder, and there's no amount of legislation that's going to stop that. So I just wanted to get that out. So I wanted to get into the there's the Uniform Crime Report the FBI puts out. It's ucr.fbi.gov, and I'll link that either in the card, wherever it is, or I'll also put it in the comments below, so you'll see that. But so I pulled up some of the statistics, and it goes from 2010 to 2014, and what you see murder in general is on the decline. So from 2010 to 2014, it went from 13,164 murders in 2010 to 11,961 murders. So that's a decrease of about 1,500 murders a year. That's great. That's fabulous, right? No difference in the laws then as there are now. You've got total gun crimes. 8,874. So you've got 13,000 murders in 2010. You've got 8,874 of those were committed with a gun. Those numbers declined from 8,874 to 8,124. So you had a decrease of about 750 murders were committed with a gun over a 5-year period. Of those murders, the numbers of weapons that were rifles went from 367 in 2010 to 248. Now keep that, put that into perspective. You're talking about legislating bump fire stocks or, inert trigger mechanisms that are going to make somebody feel better. But what are you really legislating? You're legislating a device on a rifle when only 248 murders were committed with a rifle in 2014. Who are you saving? I mean, if you're trying to save people's lives and guns are your focus, what are you doing messing around with rifles? You got 8,000, roughly 8,000 murders are occurring with pistols, but everybody's focus is on these rifles. That's just absurd to me. It just doesn't, anybody who's got any common sense whatsoever can look at a number like 248 and say, of 248 people who are murdered every year with this device and say, that's a really small number in comparison, in totality, not by itself. I mean, for every one of those people who were on the receiving end of that violence, it was, earth-shattering. It was the end of their lives. It was the end of the world. But you want to pass legislation to infringe on 350 million Americans to try to save the lives of 248 people every year. The Second Amendment is here to protect the individual from the masses, right? So it's the individual liberty that the Bill of Rights was intended to protect against. So mob rule doesn't become the ways of the United States. We are an independent republic where individual liberties are just as important as democracy is. And if you're going to go and pass a law to save 248 people, are you really doing the best work? Is it the best effort? If you're putting cameras in people's faces and trying to enact emotional responses out of people, shouldn't you focus on things that are going to really have a positive benefit? So I wanted to... I'm coming to the end here, so I just wanted to say that, in comparison, other weapons that were used in that same period from 2010 to 2014, knives or cutting instruments, 1,700 to 1,500, so murder in general is down by 200 people over that 5-year period. But you put that into perspective, people are stabbing each other 4 times, 5 times as much as they are using rifles. So you're going after rifles, why not go after knives too, Blunt objects, clubs, hammers, etc. 549, compare that to, in 2010, compare that to 367 rifles. So blunt objects are killing more people every year than a rifle is. It starts at 549, it goes down to 435. So there's a difference there of about 200 every year. So 200 more people are being killed every year by clubs and hammers than are being killed by rifles. We're going to start banning hammers and clubs? I mean, and the last one, and this one I thought was kind of interesting and kind of puts it all into perspective, I think, for me. Personal weapons like hands and fists and feet, 769 in 2010 down to 660 in 2014. So, you've got 3 times as many people that are being murdered each year just by being punched in the face or kicked in the head or stomped or being stomped on as are being injured or hurt or murdered rather, or being murdered by rifles. So in closing this whole video, this whole half hour, however long it's been, my point with all of this is I think that politicians and people who want to ban these things are not looking at the totality of the problem, and they're looking for an easy fix. And I say shame on you for being lazy. You politicians and you talking heads and you news people who are so freaking lazy that you just want to blame the object and not the person, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You're not doing good work. You're not looking at the problem with an analytical mind and trying to find a solution that is effective and plausible for society as a whole. You want to attack a right, the right of self-defense, just a little bit, I grant you, just a very minuscule amount, but you do what you always do, and you go after people who are not hurting anybody, not trying to infringe on anybody, not trying to cause problems with anybody, but you got one dumb bastard out there who commits a murder, and you immediately jump to conclusions and say we need to start banning stuff. I think it's irresponsible. I think it's dangerous. I think you're lazy. And I think you should be ashamed of yourselves. And if you vote for something like this, I think you should be exposed for who you are. So anyway, that's my point. This is a response to a lot of what I've seen. A lot of the comments I've had, I'm tired of typing. I don't want to talk about it anymore. So figured, half hour of my life can put out my thoughts, and everybody will understand where I'm coming from with this. So take care of yourselves, be safe. If you concealed carry, carry often. If you have ever considered getting your concealed carry license, I recommend you do it. I think it's a great thing to have. Train, become proficient with your weapon, understand the laws in the area that you live in and work in, because you don't want to lose your rights to do something over something careless. So take care of yourselves, like, subscribe. I appreciate that as well. If you have any comments, you want to counter what I'm saying, you want to take issue with my positions, I welcome it. I think we're all kind of a learning animal. We're constantly trying to understand each other. So if you've got something that you think you can add to this, or you want to take issue with what I've said, put it in the comments, and we can discuss it. Anyway, have a great night. You guys enjoy. Be safe. Bye.